Welcome to the show. Today we're going to have a very interesting show because I'm not talking to or about idiots. That's right, I'm having a conversation with people that are smart and I actually like. So that's going to be fun. With me I have Dapper Dino, the dinosaur in a human suit, although he's left his human suit, apparently it's at the dry cleaners. The Flerf Destroyer Supreme, MCToon, and biblical scholar, Dr. Kip. This is going to be fantastic and I hope you enjoy the conversation about, does the Bible teach flat earth? Now, this is a live stream, of course, and that means that you don't get a choice as what happens. If you're watching this as a VOD, you can just like tap the screen a few times and skip the next 90 seconds. But if you're here watching now, there's going to be an intro and you don't have a choice on that. And because you're here, the rule is you have to dance. If you don't dance, I'm going to send Daniel Pratt to your house. If you do dance, MCToon's going to send you a cookie.
Flat Earth expert Mark Sargent thinks the moon landing was a hoax.
Technically, the moon itself is a hoax.
Right, but betting with SportsBet's new iPhone app?
I could do this standing on my head.
Thanks, Gravity. SportsBet's new iPhone app. It's foolproof.
See, I'd love to. Oh, is this? Oh, we're watching it. See, I'd love to figure out how I can't figure this out. I'd love to figure out how to do this while still, being able to interact with people behind it.
You're on the hot mic.
Am I actually? What else is new?
You think Craig is letting us talk through his intro song?
He absolutely is. I checked.
Yes, I am.
And that's embarrassing, Craig. Like a
He's
professional.
clearly.
So that we couldn't
Clearly.
talk over your song or your stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
We're all professionals here.
We're living on a disc.
This is clearly Craig's first time streaming.
Yeah, I know better.
Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm Craig, otherwise known as FTFE on these interwebs. Today the stream is, does the Bible teach flat earth? We're having a conversation with smart, intelligent, fun people that I actually enjoy being around. So my brain is not sad today. We're just going to go around and introduce everyone and let them just say hello. After that they are going to state their position on what they think about the Bible and teaching flat earth, and then we're going to get into a conversation. So first off we have the dinosaur, who's left his human suit at home today, Dapper Dino. Hello, Dapper. How are you, my friend?
I am doing all right. I had some coffee so that I'm actually awake for this because, whoo boy, was it a close call earlier.
Ah, good, yes. Coffee keeps dinosaurs awake, I've heard. If you did not know, Dapper is also the GM of a Star Trek D&D type game that we play every Friday. This coming Friday, there is another episode. I play the illustrious 7 of 12, Tactical Node 3, Species 5008, an ex-Borg Klingon who is the tactical officer aboard the USS Kongzi. So if you're a nerd, please come along and join that. With us also, we have Flerf Destroyer Supreme, MCToon, who is actually a Christian. Hello, MCToon. How are you doing?
I'm good. Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. This is going to be excellent. And the special guest today is biblical scholar Dr. Kip. Kip, hello. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kip, and I don't understand how hot mics work. And I am also a member of the crew of the Kongzi. I play Lieutenant Viscount Vrelax, the science officer and cosmic archaeologist.
Gorn, science officer.
Yes, Gorn, science officer with one arm. I also I'm a biblical scholar and a specialist in early Judaism and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I do Bible stuff on my channel every Friday. I do a live stream, and they're usually pretty fun. And then I do other things.
In the description, each of the channels are linked, so if you're not subscribed to them, then you definitely should be, because they're all awesome people. So what we're going to do to start is, first off, I'm going to state my position, and then we're going to go around in the order that we just did, and each of them can state their position on what they think about the Bible and whether it teaches flat earth. And then we're just going to get into an interesting discussion, hopefully led by Dr. Kip, as he is the expert in this. So yeah, I'm going to start because I think most of you know my position, but just in case you don't. So my position is that no, I don't think the Bible teaches flat earth, and that's not me attacking the Bible. actually kind of the opposite. I think the Bible was written by people living in the Middle East thousands of years ago. They weren't explorers mapping the globe. They weren't astronomers with telescopes, and they definitely weren't trying to write any kind of science book. They were trying to understand God, morality, and meaning using language and imagery that was available to them at the time. That's why so much of the Bible is poetry, metaphor, and allegory. We get phrases like the four corners of the earth, the foundations of the earth, but then in modern times we still say things like sunrise and sunset, and nobody thinks that means the sun literally moves around us. It's just how humans talk about the world as we experience it in the world that we live in. One of the big flat earth claims hangs on a Hebrew word, rakia. You'll hear it described as a solid dome, firmament, by people like Fapsoid, but I don't think that's what that word means. I think it means expanse, something spread out, sky, not a physical like dome structure that you can knock out with a hammer. I think the Bible isn't one single book with one author and one scientific model. It's a collection of writings spread across centuries, written by different people, often drawing from earlier cultural stories and traditions. That's why you get different creation accounts, different emphasis, and sometimes contradictions. That's normal for ancient religious literature. The mistake flat earthers make is trying to force modern geometry into ancient poetry. I don't think that's what the text is doing. So no, I do not think the Bible teaches that the earth is flat. I think it teaches theology. I think the flat earth are lying to you when they try and force you to believe that the Bible is a flat earth book. And tonight we're going to have a really interesting conversation about it. But as always, I am willing to be wrong. So that's my position, and I hope you guys can understand where I'm coming from. So we're going to move on to Dapper. And Dapper, could you please tell us your position on what you think about the Bible and whether it teaches the earth being flat?
So it's the word teaches that makes my my position a little bit complicated, because I don't know that there's any passage that I would say is intended by the authors to instruct the readers or listeners on cosmology. Whereas I do think that many of the passages only make sense from the context of a flat earth cosmology. And so I would say that the Bible, well, the Hebrew scriptures assumes that the earth is flat. I would say that the New Testament is much more ambiguous about that. And if people want to come at me about that, we can talk about that. So I think if you want to take the Bible as a literal history book that's describing literal creations and things like that, yeah, I do think that the Bible is a flat earth book. I do think that the firmament is, in fact, on the basis of both how it was translated by ancient Greek translators, how the word is translated into other languages in places like where it's been translated into Aramaic, as well as its internal etymology. It's hard to say that it's not a solid dome. It is spread out by God in the creation. But yeah, so my answer is complicated. Does it teach cosmology? I don't think that's the intent of any of the passages. However, does it assume that? Yes. And would you have to come away with a flat earth idea if you wanted to interpret those passages literally? Yes. And were they intended to be interpreted literally? I think probably by the authors. But then again, you're a reader. You can do whatever you want. The author is dead. That's it.
Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate your points there. Now, MCToon is only the only actual Christian on the panel. Also, as you know, he likes to destroy the flat earth on a regular basis. So I'm very interested to hear Toon's thoughts on this position.
My religious position is undisclosed.
Well, obviously, dinosaurs don't really have religion, so...
Okay, that's fair.
Toon, over to you, my friend.
All right, so I don't think that the Bible is a science book. I think it, like Craig said, its intent is completely different. It's history, poetry, and it's about relationships. And it's not there to say, here's how to do the geometry of a circle, because it gets it wrong. And here's the the list of real birds, because it gets that wrong. But it's fine, I think, in those contexts, because that's not its purpose. The authors of the Bible, certainly the Old Testament, potentially did have that position, or I think also didn't care much, because I don't think it was a big deal about something that they explored. I don't know. I could be wrong. That's maybe a little opinion there. I think. See, question. does the Bible teach that the earth is flat? And you can have a hammered out, expanded surface around a globe. So rakia doesn't preclude flat at all. It could be a dinosaur shape.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Tuna. I appreciate that. Now, we're going to move on to Dr. Kip, who actually has a PhD in this stuff. So I take a lot of stock on his opinion, even if I don't agree with everything that he might say. But I am very interested to hear what is basically the expert on this subject. So, Kip, over to you, my friend.
I think if you're going to disagree with things that I say today, then you should have good reasons for doing so. Not that you wouldn't. I'm just going to say that at the outset. It's kind of funny because as you were talking, Craig, I immediately thought I just recently published a book. I guess it's been about 6 months, and on page 184 of my book, where I'm talking about the first creation story in the book of Genesis, which scholars will often call the priestly creation story in Genesis chapter 1. I say, if you have not already noticed by this description, as it appears in Genesis chapter 1, the language of the Hebrew Bible lends itself most naturally to pictures of a flat earth. We can get into a lot of that, but my position is essentially, I think in many respects, I'm very, very close in my thinking to Dapper Dinosaur. I approach this stuff from an historical, literary, philological perspective, and when I read the texts and when I read them against their closest cultural backgrounds in their original languages, it's very difficult to come away with anything but the impression that the people who wrote these texts almost invariably, unanimously assumed that the earth was a flat disk. Nothing of this sort is said explicitly, because I think within the ancient Semitic world, let's put it that way, because it's not consistent across the entire Mediterranean, but within the ancient Semitic world, within the world of ancient Canaan, ancient Palestine, ancient Assyria and Mesopotamia and places like that, there was just what they saw and what they experienced, and they had no reason to think any differently. I think to say that the Earth teaches a flat Earth is complicated, in the sense that I don't. It's not a mandate. It's not, the book itself is not, or the book as it's let me back that up a little bit. The individual pieces of literature that have been selected and curated and put into the book, which at one time existed and had lives of their own independent of this collection. I don't think anything in there is, again, explicitly teaching science or even proto-science, but I do also think that there is an intention on the parts of the authors for the readers to understand the physical world in which they live on the basis of things that they do say. And I think I'll say something else here, insofar as the language of the text is concerned, the Hebrew text. I must confess, I spend precious little time in the New Testament. My doctor father actually once told me that I probably just shouldn't read it. That was a joke, by the way. Within the Hebrew text, we have this tendency to make distinctions in the literature there between stuff that's poetical or prosaic. And there are certainly literary devices and syntactical features of the texts which make indications that which provide indications that these are stylistic distinctions that we can legitimately make. But then in terms of identifying the difference between metaphor or allusion or simile and what people actually imagined of, their environment is actually a much more difficult and much more complicated prospect. So I've talked a lot now, so I'll.
So you do hold the position that it is, but at least the people that wrote it held the position that the Earth was flat.
Yes.
Okay. Right, I'm just going to quickly go through the few super chats we've got. And guys, if you have any questions for anyone on the panel, feel free to super chat and we'll try and interject and get those in. We've got Leah of All Trades for $2 says, Dr. Kip, you know the deal. Treats for Dagon.
Oh, yeah, of course. That's I have a dog. I actually have 2 dogs in here today, but
puppies.
And he always gets treated.
See, secretly, Dagon is the author of the book that he published. That's the real secret there.
Yeah, of course.
He's been paid in treats because Dr. Kip has in fact written no books, as we all know.
None at all. Gary IOW for
that
£10 says, here's a £10 super chat to get you going. Let's have some fun tonight. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this discussion tonight. I spend my days usually talking to and talking about the dumbest people on the planet. So this is actually a nice break for me. The Behold Network for $5 says, if Kip doesn't mention my video on biblical cosmology, I'll riot.
So this is my friend Lawrence over at the Behold Network, who did a 90-minute video, and it's excellent, about biblical cosmology. And Lawrence, if you send me a link to that in the Discord, Craig, would you be willing to pin that or post that?
Yeah, I'll put it in the
chat
description of the
Cool.
videos. Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Let's do that. So send that to me, Lawrence, and we'll get it up there. It is very, very good. And Lawrence is a bright guy, knows what he's doing.
Nice. The Turtle Moves for £5 says, the Bible uses figures of speech to describe the earth. The flat brainers like to inflict literal interpretations on everyone. Yeah, so the way that I see the Bible is, number one, it shouldn't be taken literally. It's not a science book. It's not a book describing how the world or the geometry of the world is. And I also don't think that it was ever meant to be read by the common man. If I'm mistaken, please tell me, but I see it as a book that was a teaching aid for like priests and stuff, right?
Well, some of it was definitely a teaching aid for priests and scribes. Some of it was national history that was somewhere between embellished and legendary. Like, for instance, the connecting Moses with the patriarchs in Genesis. That's probably a late conflation of different mythologies or legends from Judah and Israel, with Israel, if I remember correctly, being the ones that were really big into the patriarchs, and Judah having a reverence for a prophet Moses. And so it varied. The problem is with saying the Bible is that there is basically nothing that you can say that the entire thing is other than in the Bible. That's basically the only commonality it has, is that it's in there.
Well, yeah, that's because there's so many different authors, right? There's no overarching kind of cohesion to it.
Yeah, I mean the cohesion is. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, that's generally true.
I'd say the only cohesion is that certain faith communities treated these texts as special for their ritual and nationalistic purposes, and so they came down to us as a group. And also, what's in the Bible still varies depending on who you ask, right? There actually isn't a collection, the Bible. If you ask, say, Catholics, you'll get one answer. If you ask Protestants, you'll get a different answer. If you ask the Oriental Orthodox, you'll get more than one answer among them. If you ask
the Mormons, there's extra magical plates they found in America.
Yeah. If you ask the Eastern Orthodox, there's yet another answer. And so, like, even saying what's the Bible, there's a certain core, like the 66 books that the Protestants have are in basically everyone's Bible, as far as I know, unless you're Marcion, which I don't think anyone is.
Not in the Samaritan Pentateuch.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, the Samaritan Pentateuch is just the Pentateuch, and it's not even the exact same Pentateuch as the Hebrew.
No, it's a little different.
So,
Well, I
Toon, how
shouldn't
do
say
you see
Hebrew,
the
but-
Bible, like in general? Because, like I said, I never saw it as something that was supposed to be read by the common man. Do you kind of agree with that?
I disagree with that. Now, certainly a lot of the people that were the contemporaries when it was written weren't necessarily able to read or write, right? So
Yeah.
that they couldn't be the ones that were reading it, as they didn't have that ability. But it seems a little like Catholic tradition to me, because the Vulgate, Dr. Kipp, what does Vulgate mean?
It's like a common. I'm fairly sure. And now you're taxing my Latin, because this is
Sorry, I
this is
assumed
a
you had some Latin.
Yeah,
I
so it
took
comes
Latin
from
for 2
Vulgata,
years. I
which
remember
means
barely any.
common.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the Vulgate was for the common man version, and then the Catholics over time had the Latin version be the one that they used, and they didn't have a version for the common man, right? So people spoke English or German or whatever, and so when it was translated from Latin to the language of the common man, the Catholic Church didn't like it, and kind of had some issues with it. So I don't know. I always thought quite the opposite, actually.
I wonder if if it might be useful to provide just kind of like a snapshot of the history of
Please do. Yeah.
this thing that we call the Bible, right? So the earliest texts that we have in the Bible are just a handful of them. I tend to point to a couple of important, and these are all poetical texts as well. Important poetic texts such as the Song of the Sea. I think most scholars will say this is the oldest piece of literature in the entire Bible. That's in Exodus chapter 15. It's a version of the story of the Exodus, and scholars will tend to place that in or around the 10th century BCE. And then you've got a couple of other texts like this, the blessing of Jacob in Genesis chapter 49, or the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 32, or the Song of Deborah in Judges chapter 5. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you give a date for that, that's the date of the writing, or the date
Yeah.
of the event, or the date of the piece of papyrus or whatever it was that it was written on, that it was dated.
So yes, these are all, at this point in time, all these dates are dates that scholars have assigned to the actual composition when this stuff was written down.
Okay.
We have no manuscript evidence for any of this until, and of those writings, the latest is probably the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32, which scholars will tend to date to the late 7th century. And from that point, the very earliest actual physical copy of any biblical text that we have appears in a couple of small little silver amulets that were discovered just outside the city of Jerusalem. And they contain what's called the priestly blessing from Numbers chapter 23. This is a text that a lot of people are familiar with. It's usually a benediction that you've heard spoken in church services. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine down upon you and give you peace. This is the earliest physical copy. Like, this is the text that appears on the earliest physical copy that we actually have. These little silver amulets that came from a place called Ketifrenom, which is just outside of Jerusalem. Date to
What about the Mount Ebal curse tablet, Kip?
Yeah, so that's a I can't say it's a fake, because it's not. It's just a mistake. So yes, the dinosaur is being funny. So so that's like our earliest physical evidence that we can actually date for a text. All the other dates that we assign to text prior to that are based on calculations of internal plus external evidence provided by the text itself, external evidence provided by how this fits in with everything else that we know about the world and the culture surrounding the text. And then we also draw from linguistic evidence. There's features within the Hebrew language that scholars will point to and will detect as particularly ancient versus other ones that are later. So that's just kind of how we date this stuff. So those are our earliest texts, and scholars will tend to say that our earliest texts were fragments of things that were floating around. There were probably stories told about the Exodus, about the patriarchs, about Jacob, about Joseph and David, the king, that were floating around and circulating for some time, perhaps even before any of this stuff was written down. But then some of the really dedicated writing of biblical texts occurred during the most likely the kingdom of Judah in the 8th century BC at the earliest. Within this world, within this ancient world, one of the things that needs to be in place for writing to even occur is a well-established apparatus, scribal apparatus, which is something that only occurs within these more developed systems of monarchies and priesthoods. And it's true. I think on the one hand, I'm sympathetic to this idea, Craig, that these old texts, these earliest stages of the Bible were a product of this world, of priests and kings getting stuff written down, because they wanted records, they wanted posterity for these sorts of things. I think you go far back enough in time, there's still this sense among people, among cultures, that writing itself, because very, very few people could read or write in what we call Iron Age Israel, there still was this sense that it's got kind of a magical quality to it, that I often say that there's a numistic sense of just the act of writing, of what texts are, and some of that feeds into the ideas of what these texts are, who is collecting them. So
one thing I want to add there real quick is that's not even just an ancient phenomenon. You'll hear stories about people who are like, oh, I put a miniature Bible in my pocket and it stopped a bullet.
That's true.
Or people selling amulets that have Bible verses inscribed into them, and they'll have them as like, that's going to provide me some spiritual protection from God. And so humans really have not changed in that opinion that there's something magical about writing. It's less intense. Most people don't think of writing itself as an automatically mystical, sorceress kind of thing. But humans still do that all the time.
We have very, very old examples. No, I was just going to say, but on that point, because we actually have very, very old examples of this with the biblical text. We have ancient. I mentioned these Katifinom amulets, these little silver amulets with the priestly blessing scroll. That's essentially that's probably what these were. These were some sort of apotropaic elements meant to ward off, evil and sickness and what have you. We have within the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are really my specialty, and these are manuscripts that were written in the 2nd century BCE up through to the 1st century CE, so over a 300-year period. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have copies of ancient phylacteries, or these ancient little strips of leather that have scrawled on them in tiny little script parts of the 10 Commandments that were then, rolled up and put in like a little box, and then, possibly worn on the forehead or on the arm. Again, as a way to protect the person. So it's I don't know. I thought that was kind of cool.
So,
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I
Craig.
think when most people kind of think about the Bible in modern day, they think like the King James Bible. You know, that's probably the one that people read the most. How close is that to actually the Bible, the text, the meanings? Because in my understanding, that Bible in particular was more about King James than anything, than actual the Bible.
I don't know. I mean the King James version, which was translated first in 1611, is actually based on an older English translation called the Bishop's Bible, and it's for the time of its production. It's a very good translation. It made use of all, as many of the best available manuscripts that the translators had at their disposal to make it. It's and I mean, it did kind of stand the test of time for a couple hundred years before being replaced by, I would say, better English translations, which drew from more information and data that we now have available to us that people just didn't have access to in the 17th century.
So,
By the way,
which Bible is it that you tend to use?
I usually use NIV, but I like Amplified too.
I think NIV is probably as
James,
popular as King James, right?
It depends.
It depends on which group.
Audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
NIV is popular with a lot of
tend to go
evangelicals.
more for King James.
Yeah.
Right, it's a couple of super chats.
So
Turtle
if I want to
Moves
say
for
about
£5.
King James, Craig,
Yeah, sorry, go on.
you finish.
All right, Turtle Moves £5 says, and then the old language gets mangled in their translation to English. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the issue I have, is there's so many translations to mistranslations. Unless you're a biblical scholar and you can go right back, it's very hard to kind of know the meaning, right?
I want to say, to some extent, there's a little bit of a
leapfrog.
Yeah, it's usually directly from the original. It's very rare that you get a translation that's from not the original. There are a few Bibles that are published that are explicitly translations of some old translation. Like you can get an English translation of the Vulgate, or you can get a English translation of the Septuagint. But generally speaking, if you're getting a translation of the Bible, it's going directly from the Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek into English without any intermediate translation. And that's actually something I hear from a lot of people in like atheist spheres. They'll talk about a translation from a translation from a translation, and that basically doesn't happen. I mean, you can purposefully go out and buy such a book if you want to know what like the Peshitta or the Vulgate says. But if you just go buy a Bible, it's been directly translated from Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek, depending on which section you're in, to the target language,
right,
whether it be English or Spanish or whatever.
So it's not true to kind of say that the King James Bible was just a translation of a translation that was a different translation. It's still a translation of the original.
It's so it's a revision of the Bishop's Bible, which was itself a translation from the original languages with reference to certain traditions and stuff, right? So like there are places where we have words, especially then, even and still today, where like that word is that it occurs in the Bible one time, and it's the only time in all of literature that word ever occurs. And
that
so when people are
actually.
And so when people are translating that, sometimes they'll reference like, well, what did the Septuagint translators think? Because maybe they were familiar with that word. Or we'll say like, well, what did St. Jerome say in the Vulgate? And like, is there an agreement? We'll check like the ancient Syriac translation or something of the Old Testament and say, well, what did they say? Because that's a closely related language. So there are times like that, but for the most part, even our very old Bible translations, like the Geneva Bible or the Bishop's Bible, were translated by people who spoke the original languages as reasonably well as they could have for the time, which, of course, is not as well as we know it now.
Right. So anyway, one of the main things that both Toon and I brought up is that we kind of both hold the opinion that the people of that time, they probably didn't care. They hadn't left the Middle East. They didn't really have any opinions on cosmology, etc., when they were writing the bits of the Bible that they did. So that's the kind of my main underpinning for why I don't think the Bible is really a flat Earth book, is that the people of the time had very little cosmological knowledge and really probably didn't care about it. Toon, do you agree with me there?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people it was borrowed from other neighboring people, you look at the parallels between Babylonian cosmology and the Jewish cosmology. Like, which came first? I don't know. And so when I look at what flat earthers say, I'm like, if you're going to be talking about that, you didn't get that. The source of the cosmology that you're talking about isn't from God. It's from the Babylonians. I could be wrong on that. I'm not super deep on this topic.
No, I was just saying.
I'm wrong. That's all right.
No, it's true. The Bible. And when I talk about the Bible, I'm almost always just talking about the Hebrew Bible. By the way, I saw somebody say in the chat that you can't go from Hebrew to English, and listen, I do it every goddamn day of my life. So
that's a weird take. Is Hebrew magical or something?
It must be. But the cosmology that's represented in the Bible is consistent with what we see almost across the board for the rest of the ancient Near East. There's nothing particularly special or unique in terms of the way that the writers of the Hebrew Bible understood the world. I'd quibble a little bit with this idea that they just didn't care. I think some of them cared quite a lot, but it probably comes through in ways that you don't see or you don't recognize just because you're not attuned to looking at or looking for the same sorts of things. For example, I would say, like, I think the foundational text for Hebrew cosmology, for providing the most comprehensive perspective of what the world looks like, is in Genesis chapter 1. So it's what a handful of scholars have come around to calling literally cosmic geography. It is a picture of the world as this writer understood it, and it is, as mentioned before, reflective of the ways in which virtually everybody else imagined the world. But for them, the shape of the world, the structure of the cosmos, what is in Hebrew called literally the sky and the ground. You hear that in the very first part of the first sentence of the Bible, when God began to create the sky and the ground, or as we know it, the heavens and the earth.
So he separated the heavens from the earth.
So
that's a few verses
that's
later.
Part of it.
Right.
Yeah, that does happen a few verses later. But that expression, the sky and the ground, Hashemayim va'at haaretz, is literally an expression of the cosmos. Like, for them, this was everything that was.
Does it imply a shape?
The phrase on its own?
No, it doesn't. So there's other things that we can see in the text that do. Okay. Yeah, and the shape party also, I need to say that doesn't come through in this story. It doesn't come through in the Genesis 1 story either. But I
actually argue that maybe the separations do imply a flat Earth, in that if you're separating the waters above and below, you're imagining some place where the waters can fall onto the ground from above, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense with like a globe. So for me, at least that part where God uses the firmament to separate the cosmic waters above from the cosmic waters below does heavily imply a flat Earth to me. I don't know.
Could he not have separated the waters from the ground below and it still just be the waters around a globe? Because again, they're not specifically mentioning a shape, right?
I think the waters above are clouds.
Well, they're not, though, because later on we see that those waters fall to the earth as part of the flood, because the floodgates of heaven let through the waters of the deep. Yeah, the windows or the floodgates or whatever. Yeah, and so
that's not. You don't see that that's a metaphor.
No.
Well, I mean, you can say it's a metaphor now if you want to, but like I don't see why you would have to assume that that's a metaphor for the ancient people, because everything, like there's also another version of a creation story in the Psalms in which God kills this Leviathan and uses that to form the land while separating the waters from the earth. And Leviathan itself is etymologically related to other ancient chaos creatures that were part of the creation myths of other ancient Near East cultures, where the gods created a flat earth with the land made from the body of Tiamat and then using a dome to
so
separate
why you were an idiot was right.
the ancient waters. I mean, here's the thing, right? Flat earthers tend to think more like ancient Near East people than most modern people do. They are wrong about a few things. Like in the ancient Near East, no one thought that the sun circled above the disk of the earth. They all thought that it went under the earth at night and then came
the elephant
back up
lifted
above
up his
the
legs
earth.
so it could go round.
Well,
Oh, no,
it
so that's
varies.
the disc world.
Actually, some of the ancient Hebrews actually did believe that the sun, rather than going under the earth, went behind the dome, and that's why you couldn't see it, because it was behind the dome.
Like in a tunnel back around.
Yeah, so they thought that it would. They thought what would happen was after set in the west, there was a portal, and it would go through the portal, and then it would go up back above the dome, which apparently is opaque, and then come back over to the east, go through another portal so it could come up above. So the flat earthers are definitely wrong when they say that they're
To be
biblical.
clear, those are very, very late.
Yeah, those are very late.
But of course, that wouldn't make sense because that
Interpretations.
would mean that everybody would get night at the same time, right?
Right.
You know.
Yep. Which, if you can only travel as fast as a camel can carry you, is not a crazy assumption, right? Because you're never
Yeah,
going to
of
go
course,
far
yeah.
enough fast enough to notice the
Absolutely.
difference.
Yeah.
No
So,
jet
like-
lag. There's no
Yeah.
camel lag.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that comes back to my point of the time of the Bible when the people that written it they just lived in the Middle East. They didn't really know of anything.
Yeah.
They didn't know America existed. They didn't know Europe existed. They didn't know that time zones
Well,
were a thing.
they
For
knew
them,
Europe
when it was
existed.
night, it was night on the rest of the world, right?
They did know that Europe existed. There's an ancient Hebrew word that occurs pretty early on that actually means like the area around where what we call like Germany and Italy and stuff. So they knew those places existed because they had trade across the Mediterranean.
And that's still relatively close to the Middle East, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Compared
It is.
to like
Like, if you
America
draw-
and
and
that,
if you
yeah.
draw a circle
When
around
you're-
all the places mentioned in the Bible, it's not a terribly big circle, but it does include parts of Africa and Europe.
And again, when you're traveling as slowly as they are, there is no sense that
Right.
that it's anything but light or dark at exactly the same time in exactly every same place.
Yeah, you would need an accurate clock that you could travel with, which didn't exist until well into the modern period.
So
Exactly.
you guys brought up
what-
the waters above and the flood and stuff, which kind of leads into Noah's Ark and that, right?
Can
It
I?
does.
I wanted to. Actually, I wonder. Can I just? I wondered if maybe providing. Just a summary of my own scholarly sense of what this looks like. Can I read something?
Please do, yeah.
Okay. In fact, can I share?
Yeah, Toon, are you able to turn your mic up a little? Apparently people say that you're a
Yeah,
little
you're
quiet.
pretty quiet.
Okay.
Gary
'Cause I've
IOW
got,
for £2 says, I'd love to join this discussion. I do appreciate that, my friend, but I'd like to keep the panel to just this four. I'm willing to have another discussion with other people another time, but for today, I don't want it to get too muddled, too many people, and I did curate this panel specifically. So I do appreciate it, but I'm not getting anyone else onto this stream today. You should have permission to share, Kip.
I turned
Okay.
up my mic.
Yep, that's better.
That is a little better, I think.
I
So-
can do more if needed, I think.
Maybe another 10%?
All right, I'll try.
So I think. Can you all see that?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
I'll make
can.
that full screen for
Alright.
everybody watching.
I could make the text a little bigger too, if that would help.
By the way, this book is available at all respectable book retailers, and you can tell they're respectable because they carry the book. And I think I'm echoing
Why
again.
is there echoing?
You are
Why is there
echoing. Yeah, everyone's echoing now. Is it because of my
Uh-oh.
screen share?
Toon, did you break it?
Oh, I can't hear Tune.
I broke it.
No.
I unbroke it. I'll
Okay,
be
there
more
we go.
Excellent.
So,
just
Kip,
trying to
this
turn
is
myself up.
from a book that you've written, yeah?
This is from my book
Allegedly.
called God's
You've never written a
Propaganda,
book,
Pulling
I've
back
heard.
I've written 5 actually, but this one is affordable. The others are not. So, and I'll just. So this is if you look at the bottom here on the right hand column of page 150, this is my translation of the story from Genesis 1 verses 6 to 10, and I'll just continue from there for a bit. Then God said, "Let there be a firmament," and I particularly like this translation, firmament. This is the King James Version's translation, because it pretty accurately, in my opinion, encapsulates the meaning of the root of the word, and I can explain a little bit about that as we go. Let there be a firmament, a barrier, literally, in the midst of the water, and it will divide between the waters. I did my very best Kent Hovind water there. I hope you heard that. For Dinosaur. Yeah. And God made the firmament, and he divided between the water which was below the firmament and the water which was above the firmament. So it was. And God called to the firmament sky, and it was evening and morning, a second day. Then God said, "Let water under the sky be gathered together in one place, and the dry land shall appear." So it was. And God called to the land, to the dry land, earth, and to the collected water he called seas. God saw that it was good. So on the second day, God fashions a hard surface, called by the King James translator the firmament. Various other translations have called this an expanse or a dome, but these don't really capture the visual sense of the word as well. The Hebrew is rakia. The word comes from a verb meaning to spread by hammering, like how a blacksmith might pound metal into a flattened sheet. The image is identical to what we see at the beginning of. This is. I start the chapter with a citation from Norse mythology of a text called the Kalevala. Like Ilmarinen, the eternal hammerer, God here is pounding out the lustrous hard surface of the sky. I forge my wisdom into an arc surrounding all. I forge my heartbeat to a dome all heavens wide. That's from the story of Ilmarinen. Every indication in the Bible is that the firmament is solid. It is firm. It is like a shiny, reflective, or possibly translucent or transparent barrier that holds the water back high above from the water below the earth. The depiction here is of a beaten metal plate or a bow that formed the vault of heaven, like a dome or a ceiling behind which there was water. As it says in Psalm 148, verse 4, "Praise him, sky of the skies, and the waters that are above the sky." The firmament elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible is pictured with openings through which the water would fall to the earth in the form of rain. It only made sense that vast oceans of water surrounded the earth in every direction above. In the story of Noah in Genesis 7, God opens the windows of the sky, and the primordial waters of chaos flood the earth. This version of the story is written by the same author who wrote the myth of creation in Genesis 1, when he says this: "In the 600th year of the life of Noah, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on this day all the fountains of great Tehom," that's usually translated as the deep. I tend to leave it untranslated because
in the 600th year of the life of Noah, Noah was 600 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, he's an old guy.
I believe he lives to be about 900 according to the text.
Close.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't actually realize that.
Yeah, there's a really interesting text in Genesis chapter 5, which goes through these very long ages of what we call the antediluvian patriarchs, those people, those great men who lived before the flood. And this is not unprecedented. This is a pattern that we see in other places in the ancient Near East, in the ancient kingdom of Sumer, which dates all the way back to 3000 BCE. They did the same thing where they attributed extremely long lifespans to just those kings who lived before the flood. And this is repeated in Babylon, and it's repeated in Assyria. It's kind of cool. But here's what, it's on this day that all the fountains of the great deep and the windows of the sky were opened. In this story, the deluge is a cosmic undoing of creation, and that's why it looks this way, That's why all the water comes back up from below the earth and comes pouring down from from outside the firmament back into the earth, because that's what's happening. It's like a great uncreation. It's like a great undoing of everything that happens in Genesis chapter 1.
God hit Control Z.
That's what he did. So in this story, yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, my, I guess, contention with the story of the flood and Noah is that it's just the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? From a previous stories.
It's not just the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is based pretty closely on the story of Atrahasis, which is contained in the Epic of Gilgamesh. But it does, like, the story in the Hebrew Bible does introduce some unique elements, and it is like we recognize the close relationship between them. Like, we can tell that the writer knows the story of Atrahasis very well, and is just basically repeating it with
and making it their own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So
I mean,
I always saw it as like almost like Chinese whispers. Like someone had heard the story and then retold it in their own way. But I mean, the whole flood, waters falling in, it appears multiple times before it was in the Bible.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a common idea. It's a common way in which the world was imagined. By the way, the story it's more complicated because the story of Noah is not just drawn from or based on the Atrahasis myth that's contained in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is also the combination of two Hebrew stories of the same thing, which tell the story in slightly different ways. And that's how you end up with some sort of interesting differences that the editor has to kind of soften out.
That happens a lot in Genesis. You get one story that's actually just two stories pasted together in places where, like, someone says, like, who sold Joseph, or who did Joseph's brothers sell him to? Because if you just read Genesis from beginning to end, there's two different answers to that question, and they aren't the same answer, and they're not compatible with each other. You have to choose one if you want to decide that the story has a single way that it happened.
So what you're saying here in this, Kip, is that the Bible is literally describing it as a door that was opened in the firmament and the waters fell in, which I guess would suggest that it would have to be like a dome or something above. Toon, how do you feel about that as it suggesting it's flat?
Well, I don't see flat in there. Number one, I see it being compatible with any shape. Number one. Number two, I see it as borrowed or received from some other source, not from a spiritual source, right? So to get too specific about it for those that are the religiflerfs, they're just saying, oh, well, we take this non-God based source for it, and that there you go. Like, that's not a win, that's not a flex for them.
Okay.
The non-God source? What is that?
Well, the flood is not something that was, well, okay, so the tradition is that Moses wrote Genesis with his own hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very unlikely. But he wasn't there for the flood, right? If you take it all literal, he wasn't there for the flood. He had to have received that information somewhere from somebody. Oral, right? An oral tradition. And where did that flood idea come from? Was that a unique thing just to them, and was that something that was only from God, or was that actually sourced from some other place outside of some sort of a supernatural telling of it to Moses or whoever did write it down from God?
Right. Yeah. So I think I mean, in terms of the actual description of the Earth or the assumption of the Earth as a flat plane in the Bible, like there's other texts that that provide this sense, and maybe I'll just I've flipped over here to page 152, which is where I make the statement, right? If you had not already noticed, this is right at the top of the page on the second column. The language of the Hebrew Bible lends itself most naturally to pictures of a flat earth. The dry land is completely stationary and set on foundations. Where were you when I laid the foundations? These are literally like the pillars.
But that could that not be just meaning that, you know, relative to us, the ground doesn't move unless it's like earthquakes or something. You know, the ground literally is stationary for us.
Right.
Is that necessarily referring to the earth as a whole as being stationary, or just the fact that the ground beneath their feet is stationary?
I suppose it doesn't have to be, but then at that point I would say, well, what else would it be from their mindset when they say that they're pillars, or when they say it's a foundation and that's just metaphorical? Metaphorical of what in their understanding?
The way I tend to look at it is sort of like, okay, if you want to introduce the idea that there are a lot of metaphors and stuff going on, I can't say that that's definitely untrue, but the problem is that in order to make that assumption, you have to assume that they had some knowledge of how the Earth actually was that was not evident at the time, in order to bring in the possibility that these are metaphors for how the Earth actually is in the minds of the authors. Now, if you have some idea about inspiration and God allowing this so that other people could recognize it as metaphorical, I don't have a way to engage with that, because like that's a topic that is outside of anything I'm equipped to talk about. But like, if you're just going from a historical perspective, because my background is in history, which is not the same as Kip's background, but there's an adjacency there. Basically, what you always want to do is say, okay, well, what's the most likely and plausible explanation for how the evidence comes to be the way it is? And for these texts, in order to come to the conclusion that these are metaphors for the actual globe Earth that, you know, circles the sun and whatnot, you have to invent knowledge that is not otherwise evident. And that is always going to be an iffy thing to do in terms of historiography, and I believe also in terms of like textual criticism and biblical scholarship, although I'm not in either of those fields, so maybe Kip can add something there.
Sorry, I stopped listening to the Dinosaur. As
How
I often do.
dare!
Quick question from Industrial Nerd for £5. He says, if there was no concept of the Earth orbiting the Sun, then how was a year measured in Noah's 600-year life? I would assume by the seasons passing and stuff, right?
Yeah. So what the sun ends up doing in the sky?
Years?
Well, so what the sun does in the sky, which is something that ancient people have known for a very long time, is it appears at, like, say, sunrise in different parts of the celestial sphere. So we have the fixed stars, and people have known this for thousands of years. The fixed stars, relative to a human lifetime, largely are unchanging. But across the year, the sun always ends up going back to the same place among those stars. And so you just pick a point, and it can be arbitrary. Usually it was ended up being tied to like the agricultural cycle, but where in that cycle, again, arbitrary. And you say, okay, that's where we start the count. And when the sun comes back around to that same point in the sky, which you usually cite at sunset or sunrise, because that's when you can most easily tell both where the stars and the sun are at the same time, you say, okay, that's a year. And it does have to do with seasons, but one thing is that in places where seasons were less seasonal, you know, places like deserts and whatnot, where lunar calendars were used, they noticed that it took about 12 times for the moon to go around. And in some places, they just abandoned the care about the solar aspect, and they just went with a lunar calendar. In fact, in places that are Muslim majority countries, a lot of times you'll find a different calendar being used, which counts lunar years from the Hijra, which is when Muhammad took over Medina. And so you even get complicated stuff like that. So mostly it's just noticing when the sun is back to the same spot.
It's not like Noah celebrated his birthday every year, you know, said, I am 409 today. You know, I don't think the concept of birthdays even really existed back then.
But you could still get a count or how many times the sun had come back around to the same spot since your birth.
Yeah, they gave a number.
Yeah.
Well,
so people were aware of how long a year is, and they could count them.
Oh, yeah.
Inquisitive
something
Infidel for £10 and $10. And I do appreciate the super chats, guys. Thank you very much. Says, I see the Bible as an early estimate of reality. We have since refined the understanding through centuries of collective data, formal measurement to arrive at the reliability of the information age. I agree, and that kind of goes back to my contention with the whole it being a flat Earth book, is that they literally didn't have a clue back then or much of a care. But there's a lot of passages, I guess, which go against what I'm saying there in a lot of ways.
I don't think that, number one, I don't think that they got their knowledge about the shape of the Earth through any investigation of the shape of the Earth. And number two, I don't think they got their knowledge of the shape of the Earth through some spiritual means. I think they got it from neighboring cultures.
I agree with Toon.
Just observation. Yeah.
Where did the neighboring cultures get it, though?
Well, so
everyone
it's a
was
combination.
looking around and going, it sure looks like this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
if you don't travel far,
and they
the
probably
Earth
did.
seems flattish.
I expect they probably did. They probably did limited tests in their own estimation too, by mostly observing, the stars and the movement of the sun and the moon and things like that as a way to sort out what this place was and what was at the very edges. So what scholars will tell you is that the Hebrew or the ancient Near Eastern cosmology is of the land on a flat plane that's surrounded by water. And one of the reasons for that is because at the time, and if you think about the ancient Hebrews living on the western coast of the Mediterranean, when they looked out to the west, all they saw was water.
Yeah.
And nobody had any sense that there was anything beyond that. And besides that, ancient mariners as well in the Mediterranean learned pretty quickly that the safest way to navigate the water was to stay relatively close to the land. And
Usually within eyesight.
Yeah. Because as soon as you get too far out, it gets really, really dangerous. And
when was the
likely
earliest
to die.
compass used?
I don't even know.
So it depends. There are legends that may or may not be true of some kind of stone being used by Northern European sailors to help navigate. But the problem there is, like, we don't have any, like, physical evidence of that, and the descriptions are kind of vague. I don't actually know when the first time, but it is the case that if you have some lodestone, which is just some rock with a high amount of iron that's actually was aligned to the magnetic field when it cooled, so this is going to be like an igneous rock with a lot of iron. If you drop that in water, it will align itself to the local magnetic field. So, like, well, you have to put it on like a piece of wood, and then you put the rock on that, and it will float and orient itself. So we do know that compasses are really, really old, but the question of when was the first time, we don't know. Like I said, there are stories that sound like compasses, but of course, were they? And there is one thing. I do actually want to give a little pushback on the I don't think they cared about the cosmology, because the thing is, cosmological things come up in the first creation story. It comes up in the creation story in, well, the sort of abridged creation thing in Psalms. There's also a lot of talk about setting the earth on its foundation so that it can't be moved, set the stars in the heavens. These are themes that come up a lot, especially in Psalms, where that is Psalms are basically poems or songs that people are using for their religious devotional purposes, right? In fact, that's still how they're used.
It's more like, explaining the nature of just the world that they can see. The earth beneath them literally didn't move. I don't necessarily see that as describing the entire world that they lived upon, just the ground beneath their feet.
But are you doing that so that you can avoid say that it's a flat Earth book? Because if that is why you're doing it, what you're doing is you're importing your current knowledge of how the Earth works, and saying, well, these people were just emphasizing that the Earth didn't move relative to them much, but there's no reason to think that they had any idea that the Earth moved relative to anything else.
I guess, of course, I'm going to have my bias imposed on anything that I do, but I look at what the people of that time would have would have had knowledge of, and the way that they would have seen the world. And I don't necessarily see it as a direct relationship into what the entire world that lived on, just literally the ground beneath their feet. Even when they're talking about pillars and stuff, it could just be like foundations of a building and things like that. And when they say about under a clay seal like a clay, I see that more as like texture with the hills and things. And I don't necessarily see that as a definite reference to the Earth.
You can put a seal
flat.
You can put a seal on a non-flat surface.
Yeah,
you can, but that was not typically what was done. Seals were pressed into clay tablets that were themselves flat to impress a symbol of ownership. Yeah, which is again tied into the whole.
Not on pottery. I know.
Typically not.
I'm not. You get Japanese pottery and it has the author in it, but I not the author, the artist. But I don't know if that was the case in A&E.
Pottery in most of the world, including the ancient Near East, and usually ends up being one spun on a wheel, and then patterns that are on there are usually carved into it. And one of the reasons for that is that generally seals have to be pressed pretty hard onto soft clay, and that's going to deform the pot. So it's pretty hard to do it with most of the seals that they're using at the time. And also, I want to say, like, in terms of the metaphor, or they were just talking about the Earth relative to them, imagine going back in time and talking to someone, and we'll say that you're magically imparted with knowledge of the language. And so you go back in time, and it's 1500 BC. Well, let's say 2000 BC, right? And you come up to someone in Canaan who is part of one of these, what later become known as like the Israelite kingdoms, and you say, the Earth actually spins around on an axis like a top, and it's shaped like a ball, and that ball itself then goes around the sun. Do you really think that they're going to say, that seems compatible with what I believe? And if the answer is no, then why do you think that they were using terms that are compatible with a fixed and stationary Earth that they actually do believe in ways that we should take as being metaphorical? I don't think that's a reasonable thing to do, right?
Well, I look at history as a whole, and when you think about when they actually started to question the shape of the Earth and do measurements and stuff, the first time we really can think about that is 2,500, 2,700 years ago, when they started, the ancient Greeks were literally questioning these things and doing measurements. And when I research history, I don't see a time before that where they were really questioning it and testing it, which for me means that they just kind of accepted that the Earth was what it was, not necessarily thinking about its geology as a whole.
But you got to remember that the idea that testing an idea is an important aspect of belief is not something that is obvious to humans from the get-go. That was something that the Greeks did that was not typical of everyone at the time.
Well, obviously it was rejected by a lot of people, and heretical by a lot of people. I understand, but because of the fact that they, as far as I can tell by looking into history, the ancient Greeks were the first ones to actually question and test and really, think about this in what the nature of the world we live upon was, leads me to the conclusion that everything before that was just references to literally what they saw around them, rather than talking about the Earth as a whole.
Yeah, it is. But then the question then is, okay, well, can you take people who are just sort of not really questioning what they see and just going with what it appears at without further investigation, and then say that the things that they wrote that are compatible with that interpretation are to be taken metaphorically? Like I said in my opening, right? Look, I'm enough of a death of the author guy to say that you can take meaning from a text that was not intended by the author, and that's not invalid. But if the question is, what was the authorial intent? I don't think we can say that the things like the foundation of the Earth, or that the stars are in the firmament, not above the firmament or in some space. Things like that the firmament itself has windows that can let in the cosmic waters above. I don't think we can say that these things were intended by the authors to be metaphors, because I don't see a way for them to conceptualize these things as other than literal, given that they seem to agree with what you just kind of figure if you look around and don't investigate, which is to say, a flat Earth with a dome over it, and the stars are in the dome, fixed into it because they don't move relative to each other across, a human lifetime. Obviously, there is proper motion, but we need telescopes to figure that out, so no one figured that out back then. And the sun and the moon are sort of just inside that, going across the sky and going under the ground. and that's how they write about things. And I just don't see why you need to say that this is a metaphor. You could just say the Bible's wrong about this, and that's okay. Because the Bible is not, I'm not going to the Bible for my cosmology. I'm going to it for theological things or devotional purposes. And I'll shut up now.
You had something there?
Yeah. Can I, all right, Dapper, put on your theist hat.
Okay. For all you know, I'm always wearing a theist hat.
It's the nice thing is about talking about you guys is you're able to do this. Flat earthers can't do this.
No, they can't.
Right? I can't say, okay, put on your Glober hat and then answer this question. They
But
can't
yours
do it.
not glue.
Okay. Yeah. So all right. So put on your theist hat and then think: is this to you? Is the passage something where God is trying to convey some information to the reader about cosmology, or is it that God is trying to convey something else and the author is including his own cosmology in the writing, or something else? Third option, I don't want it to be a
yeah, because obviously God didn't himself write the Bible. It was, I guess, his words through the lens of somebody else, which would have then put their own bias upon it, right?
So I will say this. Well, there's a few things there. One is just putting on a theist hat isn't sufficient. I would have to put on a particular interpretation of inspiration from a Christian standpoint in order to answer this question, I think, the way you want me to. So I'm really putting on a very specific type of Christian hat here. But when I do that, and when I...
though?
It's pink.
Does it have tassels?
It does not have tassels, but it is pink, and it's very tall.
Okay.
It's a very tall hat. So what I would say, if someone is going to go with, like, the Bible is inspired by God and everything in it is intended to be there by God, then I would say that what you could say is those things were not intended to be communicated as eternal truths about the physical nature of reality. However, in doing so, you have to recognize that that idea does not come from the text. It comes from your presupposition about the inspiration of the text. And so if the question is, what is the text doing? That's a different question than what, under my estimation, is God doing given this particular theology of inspiration? And those are not the same question. And the question I'm more interested in is, what is the text doing? In terms of, like, there are people that I will have theological discussions with. There's a very low number, and they're not, none of them are online very much. But for me, for a conversation like this, like, is the text inspired, and what do we mean by inspired? That's a question that I don't care that much about, because I don't have a way to really assess those in an objective manner. Those end up kind of being like, well, what's your faith tradition? What resonates with you emotionally? Things like that. And for me, I'm much more interested in, like, what can we say on the basis of things like the textual data, the historical data, the archaeological data, and things like that. And so, yeah, I definitely agree with you. You can have a theology in which you accept that the text says literally something, and that's not what God's telling you. But you have to remember, that's not coming from the text. That's coming from your post-biblical tradition about the text, which I'm not going to tell you not to do. Have fun with it.
We've got Inquisitive Infidel for $2 says, James Burke attributed the compass to the Chinese. I have heard that before, that the Chinese were the first ones to really refine what a compass was. But, yeah,
they were the first for a lot of things, so that would not shock me.
Yeah.
Although they were some of the last for figuring out that the Earth was a globe, which is also weird. Most people in China thought the Earth was flat until, like, well after the British started messing with them.
Really?
Yeah, it took into the early modern, like, late Renaissance period until most people in China caught on.
Some flat earthers like to point that out as if it somehow changes the shape of the Earth,
which it doesn't.
But then they'll go and they'll actually say that the Chinese had, some vast cosmology figured out, and they had done navigation based on this idea about flat Earth. But I'm like, well, okay, let me see it, and they never have.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not aware of
depth in that.
I'm not aware of any accounts of Chinese exploration that would require knowledge of the globe, because what pretty much everyone did, including the Chinese, when they were off exploring, was they hugged the coasts.
Well,
and
yeah,
so you hear lots of
safest
stories
thing to
about,
do, of course.
Right. Yeah, so you hear stories about, like, the Chinese getting to Korea and Japan and Vietnam and Thailand and whatnot. And it's like, well, yeah.
Coast.
Right, you can just follow the coast there. And sure, the Chinese had amazing navies with lots of really very impressive ships, and they were the first to do a lot of technological stuff. But like, I'm not aware of anything from the pre-modern period from the Chinese that would require you to know that the Earth is a globe. And you also have to remember that while the Chinese did a lot of innovations, they were also a very traditionalist group, right? Their entire philosophy on which their government was founded was on respect for elders, tradition, and honoring your ancestors. These are not the kinds of things that lead you to like rejecting the ideas of scholars of the past. These are the kinds of things that make you say the ideas of the great thinkers of the past are what they are, and they were not changing it. And you also see that in places like Europe, right, where people were like, well, Aristotle was right about everything except Jesus. He was wrong about Jesus because he didn't know about Jesus. Other than that, though, he was right about everything. And you get this strict adherence to Aristotelian cosmology, and that's where you get like the spheres that were such a big deal all the way past Galileo and stuff. So it's not like I'm saying the Chinese were particularly special in rejecting new ideas about cosmology. It's just that for some reason, flat Earth was one of those weird things that they just stuck with for a long time.
I'll tell you what, the Klingons had it the most right. They just killed all their gods because they were too much hassle.
It's true.
Yeah. NA for Bacon. Nice to see you, dude, for $6.66. Thank you. Says, hi, Greg. I mean, FTFE. And hi, MCToon. Hi, friend. It's nice to see you around. So
I think I remain the only American who consistently says Craig's name right.
Yes. Just ask Vlad how to say it. So, what you're saying is then that it doesn't really matter whether they cared about it or not. It's just what they thought in general, because it's what previous cultures and that had passed on. So even though they didn't really have their own way of measuring cosmology, it was just what was naturally thought because it is what they experienced. Therefore, they thought the Earth was flat.
Yeah, it's a combination of natural experience along with, received tradition, because everyone has received tradition, right? Like what the Bible is a received tradition. The table of contents at the front of your Bible isn't part of the Bible, right? Yeah. People decided what to put in there. And so that is a big part of it, right? When you say things like, oh, Sheol, where you go to this place of the dead where you survive on as sort of a shade as long as people keep remembering you, or like that there's these cosmic waters that are associated with the ocean but not the same because they're above the earth. Like all that stuff is going to be stuff that's a combination of what it looks like along with the ideas that previous people have had that they passed on to you.
Right. Kip, could you give me some thoughts or explain things like the four corners and stuff, and what the meaning behind that is, and how that would lead to the possibility of them thinking that the Earth is flat? Because we know the Earth doesn't have corners, so why is that?
It's a poor translation. So it's and it's really like the actual word literally means something like wing or edge. I prefer to translate these or understand these as compass points or directions.
Which, that's the way I interpret it.
Yeah, and it's like we have this perspective, and I was going to I mean a couple of these other texts where we see it more clearly. We have this perspective of like the surface of the composition of the Earth in the Hebrew mindset as like a large circle. It's literally called a circle in texts in Proverbs chapter 8,
Isaiah 40,
in Isaiah chapter 40. It's and on a circle, you're going to look in one of well, I mean, I guess you can look in like thousands of directions, but for them it was natural to look in one of four, right? Yeah. East, west, north, or south. When you're standing in any place, you're always at the center of a circle, wherever you happen to be. So that was the natural conception of this.
Okay, so sorry, go on, Toon.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, so you Isaiah 40. Let's go to that because that's one of their favorites.
It is.
So I have the Concordance of Hebrew and Chaldee Scriptures, which is from I don't know. I don't know if it's a good one or not. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. I think that would be the
I don't.
glossary
I have
that's
no
provided
idea.
by
Please
the
explain.
that like with Strong's Concordance, I expect.
Well, let's see here. 1876 by B. Davidson. Anyway, that one lists for Chug either circle or sphere. Now,
What does Hallows say?
I don't know if that is like we've talked about him putting something in, or the guy that made that putting something in, or not. Also, the Bishop's Bible uses the word globe or sphere, I think, in Amos.
Doesn't it say
many-
the round Earth, spelled Rounde or something?
Well, I have it here. Hold on.
Amos,
Well, I think
what?
that the big question is, where does
Amos
who
9:6. Yeah, hold on.
come in?
Amos
Amos
9:6.
9:6. I'd love
Says
to
he
answer
buildeth-
all these questions too.
So the Geneva Bible from 1560 and then the Bishop's Bible both say that he buildeth his spheres in the heaven and hath laid the foundations of his globe on the elements of the earth. So certainly
that's-
in the 1500s, they had something in their head about this. So when flat earthers are like, well, it was a recent thing. It certainly wasn't a recent thing if it was being used then. Whether or not that's the interpreter's addition or not, it tells us that in the 1500s, they weren't thinking flat when at least the authors of the Geneva Bible.
Kip, thoughts?
Oh, definitely. Of course, the English translators at that time weren't thinking flat. And we have much better resources, like just for the language now, than we did 150 years ago as well, right? Like Dagger brought up the main source that I use, which is the Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. It's a book that most people don't access because most people can't afford it. What's that?
I use Kip and my other friend Vishanti's
right?
access because I've
Gotta
too
love
cheap.
for Shanty.
It's
yeah.
Isaiah 40. Does somebody know offhand?
22.
Isaiah 40, 22, where the Hug. So I mean, this is just the easiest way for me to. But by the way, I was just
I
going to
always thought
go
that word was
back.
pronounced chug, if I'm honest.
So it's you have to get the guttural. It's
Yeah.
Hug. So
If you say ch for that, everyone will know, or anyone who
We'll
knows
all
what they're
laugh
talking
at
will
you.
know that you do not know a single bit of
don't know
Hebrew
what
at
you're
all.
talking about.
I mean, I don't know
So-
a single bit of Hebrew. You know, I
is
only
fair.
know what
There you go.
I look at the words and like I say it in my English tongue. I don't know any Hebrew. I'm not ever going to pretend that I can speak Hebrew or anything.
I
You
also
know,
real quick
I
pulled up
teach-
Amos 9 in Hebrew, and I don't think you could pull any shape, round or flat
Hebrew-
from that.
I teach Hebrew online, by the way, for anybody who's interested at
Do it.
Digital
Sign up.
Hammurabi.
I'm busy trying to actually learn Klingon, so give
I
me a
rotate
chance.
through a very, very useful language. Yes. So like it's Amos 9:6, the translation there's really interesting, and you can see pretty clearly there that this is there's more going on for the translator than just a commitment to what's happening in the text, because the words there are it's the one who builds in the heavens ma'aloto, which is his upper chambers, and this is a word it's like a super rare word. I have to,
So they
I have to look at that.
they took his upper chambers to mean sphere.
I think so.
It seems like the translators did, but I don't think you could
I-
do that reasonably.
You
No,
can't
I-
do that. No.
I agree. I know that that's not right. My point, of course, when I bring it up is because flat earthers often like to claim that the globe is a recent thing. In fact, some of them claim even that it only started existing in the 1900s.
1943, I've been told.
Blatantly a lie.
Yes, that is absurd.
Right, but I just use it to just highlight how aggressively flat earthers lie.
Yeah, well, yeah. There's a few things going on. One is
what did they lie about there?
when the
They
globe was
claim
invented.
that-
What's
Yeah.
Oh, when
they
the-
claim
oh,
that
okay.
the globe was invented in the 1900s.
Right.
Oh,
which is
okay.
just
Yeah,
Or
that's
at least in the
absurd on its face.
1500s, which
So-
is where that
CE.
translation comes from. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
So wow. That's
so
Uh,
I
so can we
Just let me just
so
catch up on a
let's
couple of
talk
super
about,
chats quickly. NA
yeah.
for Bacon has gifted 5 membership. Thank you very much, my friend. I do appreciate that. Templar Warden says for 5 New Zealand dollars, if nothing else, this stream was my first encounter of a biblical mythicist, and I really needed that. Glad you're enjoying it.
biblical mythicist.
what's a biblical mythicist?
I don't
Is
know
that
how
someone
to-
who
I don't
thinks
know
the
how to
Bible is a
mythicist.
myth?
That.
I mean, the Bible's right there. I could go pick one up.
It doesn't exist. Fits of Rage 23 for $2 says, Craig, don't listen to Kip. He hates the Bible.
It's true. Kip does hate the Bible. He has the shirt to prove it.
I fucking love the Bible. So
Is that a bit like
Available on
a
Kip's merch
Jesus
store.
mythicist, that like Dr. Richard Carrier that doesn't think Jesus existed? Is that what they mean? I don't know.
Is that going to be our next
know.
topic? Because who boy is that
Bible
dumb?
mythicism.
I had people tell me, "Oh, you just don't know enough about Richard Carrier's arguments." So I looked into Richard Carrier's arguments, and I was like, "Oh, these are way dumber than I thought they were."
I mean, the dude can drink. I know that much.
Well, I mean, hey, good for him. He's also someone who
Yeah.
admitted to, sexual harassment and then some in court filings that he himself filed. So
Yeah, yeah. A bit like
Not that bears on
Lawrence
the truth or
Krauss, who was
falsity.
also in the Epstein files.
yeah, a whole lot of people were in the Epstein files.
I wasn't in the Epstein files.
You were not, as far as I know. You know what,
Really?
though? Donald Trump was in the Epstein files more often than God is in the Bible,
Also, more times than Harry Potter was in the Harry Potter books.
which is quite the accomplishment. Although, to be fair, I think there are actually like millions of documents. So, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think last count,
What
at
am
least
I-
in the 3 million documents that have been released, was 38,309 mentions.
That sounds similar to what I heard. Yeah. Not that I'm
one
going to
of-
sit
one of
down and
my-
count them.
One of my favorite creators on YouTube, Rebecca Watson's made a couple of videos about the places where she's mentioned in the Epstein files, and they're pretty funny.
She's one of the few people who can be not ashamed to be mentioned in the Epstein files
Right.
because all the
Exactly.
actual horrible people are just talking shit about her,
They're just
which is like,
bitching about her. It's
Yeah.
pretty great. So, yeah,
Rebecca
her
Watson.
name is Rebecca Watson.
Oh, okay.
She does.
Yeah, she's in the
excellent
Epstein files, but all
science
the people in the
communication.
Epstein files don't like her and we're talking shit about
On
her, which
YouTube.
I'd be happy if the Epstein files were talking shit about me. I'd be like, okay, that's cool.
yeah, when
Yeah,
all the
right.
worst people in the world hate you, you've done something correct.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, Isaiah. So, yeah, Isaiah 40 verse 22 says, he is the one who sits on the hug of the earth, or sits above the hug of the earth, and its settlers, using the same word, which is a neat little bit of poetic artistry there, are like grasshoppers. He is the one who stretches out then, like a piece of cloth, the heavens, and spreads them out like a tent for people to live in it.
But could that not just be referring to the sky in general and therefore space?
So that's, I mean, there's no space in the Hebrew cosmology, right? It's a barrier. So, and as you know, Dapper's pointed out, the sky, like the sun and the moon are literally like set against it. It's interesting because in the Genesis 1 creation story, when you look at it and read it carefully, it says that like they could be sitting on it, the sun and the moon on the surface of the rakia, and they move around there. The stars, in their estimation, were actually like divine beings. We see very frequently referenced throughout the Hebrew Bible. The stars are called one of the most common expressions that appears in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament is this term, the Lord, or Yahweh is the name of the God of Israel, Yahweh of hosts. This is literally
Sabaoth.
Yahweh of armies, Sabaoth, Yes. These are like, and then they'll talk regularly about the tsabaot of the sky, right? These are the stars, and they're imagined literally as like the armies of God, the armies of the gods who are just standing at the ready, waiting to fight. Judges chapter 5, one of these very early texts that I mentioned, has a really interesting, it describes, it retells a famous battle that took place between the tribes of Israel and the city of Chatzor, which was located in the northern part of the region. And it says in the texts that the Kokavim, the stars, literally actually came down to fight alongside of them when they were facing off against the king of Chatzor.
Wait, the stars were people?
Divine beings.
Yeah,
So
right.
they're like gods, godlike beings. I hesitate to call them gods because there's lots of different classifications for divine beings, but they're not. Yeah, they're not people. They're,
One of the problems there is the words that we use to translate into gods don't all mean the same thing across time, even within the same culture.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
So it's
But
yeah.
this word though, chug, that we translate as, and you'll often see, and this is like literally one of the last times I went to church, on like a Sunday with my family before I stopped going altogether. The pastor had used this text to say that this is the round Earth or the globe Earth. That and you said too, Mike, right? That in the glossary you were using, that it offers circle or sphere as a proper translation of Hug. He is the one who sits over the Hug, the circle or the sphere of the earth, as far as we know, and in everything that we can see in the text, because this is how lexicography is done. This is how people who study and scrutinize these ancient texts and these ancient languages, how they arrive at what these words mean. Because for lots of them, some languages we actually do have like ancient dictionaries, but we don't have one for Hebrew. So they're looking and they're just saying, where is this word used? And in every place where this word is used, what does it look like it means? And then let's compare that to other languages, other similar languages that have, similar words or cognate words, and how are they using those words? So in every instance that we can see, the word hug just means circle. In fact, in my dictionary, which is the Hebrew Aramaic Lexicon of the Old Testament, this is the really expensive one. It just says that Hug Haaretz, that's the circle of the earth, as it appears in Isaiah 42:22. The earth is conceived as a disc. So that's
could it be that the author B. Davidson in 1876 put that in as just part of his own, because he knew the cosmology
of the real world?
And I think too, there's probably still a sense they probably don't, because bear in mind too, like in 1870 what?
1876.
That's
So
relatively
like
recent,
after,
of course.
well, it depends on what you're talking about here too, because after 1876, like at that point in time, the only Hebrew literature that we had was in the Bible and the later medieval rabbinic texts. We had very little else. It was only in 1876 that would have been like 25 or 30 years after the publication of the first of the Akkadian texts into English and into other European languages. And then this is before the 1920s, when we discovered a huge cache, a huge collection of Ugaritic of tablets at a place called Ugarit, which is in Lebanon, modern day Lebanon, and this is a site which was it's a large city that was destroyed around 1200 BCE. But when they excavated at Ugarit, they found hundreds and hundreds of tablets, of clay tablets, that were written in a language that's very, very close to Hebrew, but using this other script, this ancient script called cuneiform. So that really helped to expand our knowledge just of the language, because now suddenly we had all this available additional data, which helps to flesh out the ways in which individual Hebrew words are functioning in sentences. Okay. So yeah, so that's like he's probably so just he's probably like taking for granted things about the language that he didn't know as well as we know now.
Yeah. More proof that flat earthers are lying about the globe
always
being invented in the 1900s. Okay, so a good friend of mine, Nuriel, lives in Israel. He's a practicing Jew. His first language is Hebrew. I sent you, I put in our group chat here a link to his channel, which is called Roundabout.
Previously Round Thinker.
Yeah, it used to be Round Thinker. So he has a different view of this particular verse. He sees the word hug there as he sees another use of it in either Psalms or Proverbs where somebody's drunk and they're walking in circles as they're drunk, and it uses the same root apparently. I don't know the Hebrew well enough to identify that. Well, and so he says he sees that as a verb, not as a noun. That verb being the earth moves in a circle. That's what he says, his position, right?
Interesting.
And then God is sitting above the movement of that circle, which is the earth moving around the sun in its orbit around the sun.
I mean,
so
who
I guess
in Isaiah 40? Sorry.
I was so I guess you could put that. I mean, there is I will say that he is the one. I have like I'm moving on. I would say that we understand the difference in the old text between nouns and verbs.
Yeah.
And while this now I don't even think this actually, as I think through this, this can't be a verb.
It's the object of a preposition.
It's the object of a preposition. Yes, there's a way that you could do it by if it was a participle, but it's not, and I know it's not because hug is the word here is derived. Almost every Hebrew word is derived from like a triliteral root, a root that's composed of three individual letters, and they will very often make both verbs and nouns from these roots. This particular root, the word is derived from the root chet gimel, and that root we actually see means to encircle. So if this were a verbal expression, the way that you would make a participle of that is not this way. It would look different. It would look like probably chogag would be the participle form. If that's what's being communicated here, it's almost certainly a noun. And the other way I know it's almost certainly a noun is because this word is in a relationship to ha'aretz, which we identify as a construct and this is the way that you express possession in Hebrew. It is the circle of the earth, right? Like the
So it would have to be used in a different form for it to be a verb.
yeah, it would look different.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Sorry, you were
PhD
gonna
Tony
say
has
something,
an
Deborah.
interesting question. He says, would the panelists agree that this raises a profound theological problem? If some biblical texts are unreliable, the question becomes how much?
What do you mean
I mean,
reliable?
Yeah, I guess
I
you
don't
could
like
say
it.
like literally true. I don't know. So I'll say this, right? I'm not anyone's pastor or priest or bishop or rabbi or imam or anything else,
You're
right?
my GM, that's close
So
enough.
That's fair. Yeah, I do have the power of life and death over tech. So, and Lieutenant Vrelax for that matter. But so take anything I say about theology with a big old grain of salt. But I'll say this: there are groups of, I'll go with Christians in this case, who have different ideas about what the Bible is doing in terms of recording history versus legends versus other things. And there are large swaths of Christianity who maintain a theistic view and a high Christology and whatnot, who do not see the historical or scientific reliability of the Bible, if we want to use those terms, as terribly important to that. And they have different ways of understanding how that works. And so you might want to ask them, because that's not my area. But like large amounts of, say, the Episcopal Church, the Catholic Church, some segments of the Eastern Orthodox Church have members who are not particularly concerned with the literal, historical, or cosmological accuracy of various bits of the Bible. And so, I don't know, maybe check with them.
Right, Kip, so you said earlier that there was no space in Hebrew cosmology and stuff, right? Which I guess goes against my claims at the beginning that Rukia means expanse / space, because that if there was no space in Hebrew, then that can't be what that means, right?
So I think I understand why you get that, and you'll see that as well. There's a lot of English translations which will render rakia as expanse. I don't like it. And I think the reason they do that is because they're also reading this second part of Isaiah chapter 40 into what's in Genesis, when they talk about how he spreads out the sky like a canopy, right? Like a tent. I've seen some Christian apologists say that this is a description of is it it's like cosmic expansion. There's a term for that, isn't it? Isn't there? You science boys. There's a
so it could be referring to the expansion of the universe.
Expansion,
Yeah, that's a way you could do it metaphorically, yeah. Although I like.
But how would they have known of the expansion of the universe back then?
They wouldn't, right?
No.
Yeah.
And what they're actually talking about is because I mean I don't know about you guys, but like I've owned lots and lots of tents.
I've owned a few.
Yeah.
In my dome tents, in fact.
I allow my captives to go outside in the tent sometimes.
Oh, that's nice. We get some fresh air.
That's good. Yeah. So, but you set the poles up, and that's what you do. You stretch the fabric over them so that it's tight, but it's not constantly expanding. It's just it is a fixed space that is spread out,
and ideally it's spread out over a flat surface.
Some people in the chat are saying that it
surface,
refers to hemispheres.
Well, the sky is sort of a hemisphere from a flat Earth perspective, right? Now, it's one thing that I always
the hemispheres,
the tent, like the dome of the tent, like it's sort of a hemisphere. Because from any point on Earth, you only ever see half of the night sky, roughly. It's slightly less than half or slightly more, depending on your elevation and whatnot. But like whatever. So yeah, the sky is roughly a dome shape. Now, it's not clear whether they think there's actually an entire sphere because the stars keep rotating through and they're supposed to be fixed to something. But like, I don't, whatever.
Could the stars not be doing the same thing as the sun, going through the portal and coming back?
Well, no, because they're supposed to be embedded in the firmament, so there's some kind of solid structure.
There's a limited number of portals.
Yeah, I mean, how many portals do you think there are?
I don't know. If there's one, there could be lots.
No, I think, and they go to Enoch usually there's like, I don't know, 13 or something like that.
PhD Cody made an interesting point earlier in the chat that obviously the earliest portions of the Bible were obviously written by polytheists, right?
I mean, I think you could argue that the entirety of it was, depending on exactly what you mean by polytheist. I think it's pretty clear that most of the New Testament authors think that the gods worshipped by the Romans and the Greeks and maybe the Egyptians too are actually entities that exist, and they think that the God of, the God that sent Jesus is supreme above them, and in some cases that the gods that the other groups are worshiping might actually be like secretly evil or demonic or something, but like they're actual supernatural entities.
But not necessarily gods, because obviously the Bible says that there is one God, right? And so they're just...
Well, it says that there's one God for Israel, which is not the same thing as saying there's only one God, right? Like I could say, well, there's only one computer for me.
Okay, that's not how I've ever interpreted that. I've always interpreted that as literally saying that there is only one God, and that's it. But I guess it would just be referring to the God of Israel, right?
That seems like what's going on there. And also, you got to remember that there's another couple things. One is, what is a god? Well, conceptions of deity change over time, both within and between cultures. So there's that problem, right? So like what you conceptualize as a god today is probably a transcendent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipotent being. But for most of history, no one believed that anything like that existed. Most people believed in gods that were localized, usually had a body, had limits to their power, and while they had superior knowledge, were not all-knowing. And you can even see ideas like that in the Bible, right? Like Adam and Eve hide from God. Well, clearly the author, or at least Adam and Eve, are conceptualized as not imagining God to be omniscient, because if they thought he was omniscient, how do you hide from an omniscient being? You can't.
Well, no. So Adam and Eve might not have been thinking that he's omniscient.
Right. But what I'm saying is, like, as we see the ideas of deity, develop through time, that becomes one of the problems with identifying polytheism versus monotheism, right? Because there might be a situation in which you have a group of people who are believing that the gods of, say, the Greeks have power similar to what the Greeks thought they had. But that doesn't make them the supreme being over the universe. Maybe they think that's the God of Abraham, or maybe they think that like Poseidon and Zeus are evil devil tricksters. But then, things like that still make them divine beings to some degree, right? They have superior power that humans can't access without their help, and that's what gods typically are in a lot of the ancient world. It's not that they're the foundation of reality, as a lot of like philosophical theism likes to talk about. They're just supernatural beings that are very, very powerful. And so from that standpoint, if you accept that as a god, right? If you accept Zeus as a god, as the Greeks conceive of him, then it's hard to argue that the entire Bible isn't polytheistic.
Okay, that makes sense. So, Truth Nerd says for $5.99 there are only 2 portals because Valve can't count to 3.
It's true.
So what was that? I actually find this perspective that the Dinosaur is talking about with respect to ancient views of gods really helpful for making sense of some of the things that we might see in the Old Testament that can seem maybe a little confusing or odd when it comes to describing God. What I like to say when in terms of who the gods are or how ancient people conceived of them, they were like people in every respect except just more amped up to 11. So they were gigantic, they were super strong, they were smarter in every respect than any human. The thing that is often missed in this is that they experience the same emotions that people do, but then like all these other attributes, they're like amped up to 11. So sometimes there's places in the Bible, even where it talks about Yahweh's reactions to things, and you might be tempted as a reader to go, "Wow, that's a bit much. That's feels
That
like
yeah, that's always how
a
I feel
lot."
it. Like the reactions were a bit extreme.
Well, they're
It
supposed to
makes
be.
good sense, exactly, from an ancient reader's or an ancient writer's perspective, because the gods are like that. Like they just everything about them is just like enormous, including their feelings. They can, and that's part of why you have to be really careful a lot of the times, because there is the potential that you could trigger a particularly triggerable divine being.
Yeah, which is if he is all powerful, there's something you really don't want to do.
I
Well,
like
again,
to-
they
yeah.
usually weren't conceived of as all powerful. They were very powerful, but not
Yes.
all powerful. In fact, even in there are places
Maximally
in,
powerful.
right. There are places in the Bible where the God of the Bible loses.
Look, I've killed
doesn't
Zeus in
do
God
this
of
way.
War many times. It's fine.
Well, yeah,
I
but
like-
like Jacob can wrestle with God and get the best of him until God cheats. There's at one point where it seems like Chemosh or whatever is actually able to prevail against the God of the Israelites, in that they go into his territory and then he gets angry at them after they cause a king to sacrifice his own son, and he's like, all right, well, I guess Adonai has no chance here anymore because I'm in charge in this area, and you get defeated. And we even have ideas of that, like local importance
Yes,
of
good
deities. The deities have a range in which they're powerful, but outside of that, they're either less powerful or not powerful. That's why we get ideas of like, bring some soil from Israel into Babylon so that I can worship God in Babylon, because I need the dirt, the physical land that God is tied to. And we also have things like in the Psalms, God judges the other gods of the nations as a way of sort of giving a universalizing this idea of the God of Israel, so that not only does that give an excuse for people in exile to worship the God of their ancestors, but also as sort of a divine justice by saying, like, these other gods who were in charge of Babylon, they screwed up. They did a bad thing. And so now, our God is going to take over from them, which requires you to believe that previously they had power in the region that you're now in. But now you think that maybe your God has deposed them. So all of this is very different from most modern theist conceptions of God being a disembodied, transcendent, omniscient, omnipotent being. The gods are, as described in the ancient world, were knowledgeable and they were powerful, and they had awareness of things going on in ways that normal people couldn't. They had sort of an ability to see farther, hear more. But
So
they're
what you're
not
saying is, when I meet
omnipotent.
God, there's a chance I could win the fight.
Yeah, as long as he
No,
doesn't
not
cheat and
anymore.
paralyze your thigh. Well, not anymore, yeah.
I mean, if you
'Cause
see
they-
my
you know,
guns,
they-
of course I'm going to win.
Well, he'll start off with the thigh paralyzing. He learned from that time that he was wrestling that the first thing you do is you paralyze the thigh.
He's gonna
Yeah,
sweep
but
the
I
leg.
know that's going to happen now, so I can counter that. It's fine.
Oh,
What-
okay.
That's what he wants you to think is going to be his opening move.
Sneaky.
I like to go to the story of Noah's flood as a good illustration of this as well, where it says in the text that God is very upset at all the violence on the earth. This is why he decides to flood the
To press
earth in the
Control
first
Z
place.
on creation.
To
like you
press
said.
Control Z, and it says in there that, first of all, it says that he was sorry, that he was regretful,
very Canadian.
that he made. Yeah, it's very Canadian. That part is, he was
Sorry, eh?
regretful that he made humans. But then it says, most English translations will say he was grieved in his heart about it. And that word there that we translate as grieved is actually really, really intense. In other places where it is used, it almost feels like an insane, irrational form of anger. Almost akin to to like the sort of jealousy and frustration and anger that you might experience if your wife or your girlfriend cheated on you, that kind of thing. Like that's the emotion that's expressed. And there's actually an active modern Jewish tradition. I'm not entirely sure how far back this goes, but there is actually a modern Jewish tradition that the flood was an overreaction. That, you know, God took
having a
this
bad
step
day?
yeah, like it was just and that his vow, you know, after the not the dust settles, but after the
water recedes.
settles,
After the water's receded, yeah.
and everything returns
Yeah.
to normal, and he's starting over. He says there, you know, I'm never doing this again.
Like
They'll
the
point
new
to that and say
covenant,
this is
etc.,
this
like
is this is the new covenant, but this is
Yeah.
a recognition of him going, my bad, I went too far.
Whoops, I got pissed off. Sorry.
So yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah,
but
the chat's
this is-
right. A bit of an overreaction is quite a strange way to describe wiping out humanity.
Well, not just humanity,
lot of it
everything that
overreaction.
wasn't on the ark.
yeah.
So-
Now,
By the way, one quick pet peeve with young Earth creationists: stop saying that insects weren't on the ark. The Bible is very explicit that the creeping things are on the ark, and when the Bible describes what a creeping thing is, it lists various insects among them. So the Bible very explicitly says that insects were on the ark. In any reasonable reading, you're just saying that because you don't want to have room and have to have Noah care for all those insects.
yeah, there's no way there could have been spiders and elephants. They would have been trampling all over the place.
True.
but they're scared of spiders, right? Is that it?
I'm not sure. I'm not up on the like the creationist biology of arachnids.
Okay, I
Probably
think we're
'cause there
going to
isn't
start
one.
wrapping things up. It's been an extremely interesting conversation, and there might be even more for a part 2 at some point, because I knew there were some other people that wanted to come in and have questions. I just want to say thank you to all 3 members of the panel that joined, and I appreciate that it's been a cordial conversation, even though we all don't agree on the positions. I certainly have some things to think about on my position, 100%. Toon, have you... has your position changed at all? Have you got any things to think about from this?
Oh, I certainly learned some new things from, especially from Kip, Dapper too. But Kip's background is very helpful. Yeah. So
My pleasure.
But of course, it doesn't matter if the Bible teaches flat Earth or not, because you know it was written thousands of years ago when people didn't know about the shape of the Earth, and they literally just had their interpretations and wants and needs. We now know today that the Earth is definitely a globe that orbits the sun because we can measure it and go to space and look at it. So, you know, even if a flat earther is right that the Bible says that the Earth is flat, it doesn't change the fact that the Earth is a globe at the end of the day.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And I think
wrap ups here.
Yeah. All right, let's go around the order we did before and give if there's any final thoughts or things to say. Jim Daniels for $50. Thank you very much, my friend. That's incredibly generous. Says, question for the panel. If things like the shape of the Earth, thanks Apollo 8, have been shown to be a globe and the firmament to be non-existent, thanks NASA, in your opinion, how much of the Bible can really be taken seriously? Thanks. Well, again, I think I look at the Bible as a product of the time that it was written. Right? They didn't know about the Earth. They couldn't go to space. They didn't have telescopes. They didn't have measuring instruments. They only had their theology, their things they'd heard from other civilizations, their beliefs. They didn't have a definite understanding of what the world was. They could just look up at the sky and see certain things and believed in a deity of some kind, and it was a literal product of the time. I don't think anything in the Bible is true. There is some historical elements that are certainly been verified, but there's a lot of things that I think are untrue as well. But I don't think that the question of well, if we know the Earth's a globe, can we take the Bible seriously? Because the Bible, I don't think, was ever written as a science book to tell us the shape of the Earth. Whether the people that wrote the Bible thought the Earth was flat or not, and mentioned certain things about the nature of the Earth, I still don't think the Bible is there to teach us about the shape of the Earth. So I don't think it really changes what the Bible is in its own message. Any disagreements there?
I would say I think the framing is a bit weird because there's more than one way to take a text seriously, and in terms of like historical or scientific accuracy, that's only one way in which to take a text seriously. And there are many people who take the Bible seriously without believing in, say, a literal worldwide flood or 6,000-year-old creation or things like that. And so and also remember, every single text in the Bible is its own text that does not rely or depend on other texts for how much of it is historical or not. You need to take each one on its own, and even in many cases parts of it, because a lot of the texts in the Bible aren't even single texts really. They're compilations of multiple texts that have been stitched together by later editors. So it's one of those questions where it's like there's not one answer to that question.
Yeah. Toon?
I think it's important that when flat earthers try to leverage their particular position on what the Bible says, all that they're doing in the end is saying they're claiming that the Bible is wrong, and they're leaning into that because the fact is that the earth is a globe. So when they do that and try to use their particular view on the Bible to actually try to claim make their claim about the earth shape, it's not helping, right? Unless they actually want to attempt to discredit the Bible, which certainly there are people throughout history who aren't Christians who have wanted to use things like the shape of the earth claims in the Bible as a means to discredit the Bible. Robert Schadewald, for example. And so they're just shooting themselves in the foot, unless that's their actual goal, which they don't tend to seem to have that be their claimed goal. So I think flat earthers, you're doing yourself a disservice to go to the Bible to claim that, because all you're doing in the end, rather than presenting evidence for the shape of the earth, you're presenting a claim that's just not your claim. It's a claim from somewhere else. That doesn't make it true.
I think we'll let Kip have the floor for final words, and then I think I've got through all the questions that were there. So, Dapper, was there anything else that you wanted to say before I go to Kip?
I've had a few people, not recently, but a few people tell me that I had beef with Toon because he and I might disagree about Isaiah 40. And as far as I know, I don't have any beef with Toon.
Yeah.
So
people that are intelligent can disagree and not hate each other.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I can't imagine having beef with someone over like the interpretation of one chapter of Isaiah. Like I just can't even imagine that being a thing I would do.
No, same. I disagree with you on a lot of the interpretation of the Bible, Dapper, and I disagree with Toon that God is real, etc. But we are smart people, so we can all be here and have a civil conversation. That's why this isn't a flat Earth debate where it just resorts into me calling you a fucking idiot, because I don't need to do that. Which is refreshing and nice for me to have a conversation like that with people that I actually respect. And a lot of people are like, how can you respect Toon when he pushes the Bible? And I'm like, well, because he's a decent person, and he has his own reasons for believing in the Bible and believing in God, and I can never take those away from him. But also at the same time, he's never going to push that on me, and he's never going to call me stupid or that because I'm an atheist, because he's an intelligent person and he can have a conversation with someone and disagree with them. Unlike a flat earther, because if you don't agree with a flat earther, like what happened with Jeranism, as soon as he stopped agreeing with flat earthers, he was the devil. He was sent by Satan to destroy them, and that's the difference between having a conversation with people that are smart and decent compared to flat earthers who are not smart or decent in the slightest. So, Kip, I'd like to give you the floor for final thoughts, because obviously you are the expert in this subject, and I do very much appreciate your expertise, and you've definitely given me things to think about and things to go through. So, any final thoughts from you?
Sure. And I'm happy to continue this conversation. at another point as well.
I think a part two
I
is
do
cool
want
for
to
you.
like, yeah. I want to return to this, this super chat here about how much of the Bible can really be taken seriously. So I'm a Bible scholar, but one of my favorite Bible scholars, the great Professor David Carr, who teaches at Union Theological Seminary in New York, once told me the Bible is a conversation. It's not a conversation ender. It's a conversation that we can all enter into, which echoes a very common, popular Jewish perspective of the scriptures. Professor Carr isn't Jewish. I'm not Jewish either, by the way, now that neither of us are Jewish, but it echoes this very common Jewish idea with respect to the Bible, that you turn it over and over and over again. I think what a lot of people miss is, and this is something I try to do as a Bible teacher, as someone who, fucking loves the Bible. I'm very, very deeply interested in where the Bible comes from, where the texts were first written, to whom, under what circumstances. But I'm also really interested to see that this is a collection of literature that has it has survived as long as it has because so many people have cared so deeply about it. And in the course of that survival, the ways in which people read their text changed over time. And this was just a common thing that happens. I spend most of my time, my actual academic work is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are the oldest copies that we have of biblical manuscripts. They're some of our earliest clear attestations and signposts for early Judaism and the world out of which Christianity emerged. And this is something that we see all over the place, is that people were reading these texts and they were taking them and providing new meanings to them, giving them new shape. And this is something that we continue to do. So I personally think that everybody should take the Bible very seriously, just because if we're living in the Western world, this has been the foundational text, if not one of the foundational texts for our entire cultural outlook. There are so many things, whether you believe the Bible or not, that you owe to this heritage of having been raised in a culture that has been shaped by the Bible. And I also continue to find it really interesting and really useful and redemptive in various other ways. As an example, while I don't think that the story of the Exodus is a story about how we shouldn't have slaves, you can see that in that story. You can understand that. You can develop that meaning out of that. In the same way that I don't think, and I'm going to, with the slavery again, in the same way that I don't think the story in Genesis chapter 2 and 3 about Adam and Eve is about emancipation and human independence. It's a message that I can derive from it. Because we're creative beings, because we're creative people, and because we will find enrichment in all sorts of types of literature. So, yeah, on that point, like, this is just another way to, I think, explain how or why, and we've seen some of that, how and why people will look at the Bible, even though it wasn't intended to communicate messages about, our scientific messages about modern cosmology. People will see that in there. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that.
Unless you're a flat
I
earther.
think unless you're a flat
Yes.
so long as you recognize where this stuff comes from and how the texts work and have been shaped and developed over time.
Well, I want to thank all three members of the panel. You can find their channels all linked in the description, as well as the video that Kip asked me to post. That's in there as well. Jim Daniels for $5 says, thanks to replies. You guys rock. Not you, Gary. Truth Nerds for €2.49 says, Dapper doesn't have beef. He has Stegosaur. And then Mr. E-Man gifted 5 memberships, so thank you very much. Guys, I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to close down the Zoom call now and finish up the show. But yeah, thank you very much for coming and having this extremely interesting conversation for me, and maybe we can arrange a part 2 and go into some more specifics. So Dapper, MCToon, Kip, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you all soon.
Thank you.
Lots of fun.
All right, thanks.
Bye. Right, guys, that was actually a fantastically refreshing stream, and I do want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for you all being here, being part of it, and I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a change of pace. I'm going to be off for the next couple of days. Tomorrow's Tuesday night, so you can watch Toon. Wednesday is my wife's birthday, so I'm going to be spending the day with my wife, taking her out for a nice meal, getting her drunk, and, you know, doing what husbands and wives do, so that's going to be fun. So yeah, any birthday messages or wishes or to my wife would be very much appreciated, and any PayPal donations, I will buy her some extra drinks with that. That will also be appreciated. But yeah, thank you very much, guys, for all being here. Vlad, I didn't really ask you. Have you got any thoughts about how today went?
Honestly, this is what I believe. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a flat earther. Either A, he knows it, B, he doesn't know it. But here's what I know, is that he is backing away he's beginning to back away from the shit we could just set his ass on fire about, because he doesn't want to go up against an Eric Dubé or a Bro Sanchez or a Blacklight, anybody like that. He doesn't want to go up against them, because now you're going to have to compare oranges to our oranges,
which are full of dumb. Anyway, guys, that is it for today. Thank you very much for being here. I have pinned in the chat a link to a Little Wolf's Den channel, who is doing a stream in about 45 minutes, so please go and check that out. And if I don't see you before, I will see you on Thursday for a satisfactory / dunking on angels of pie stream. Until then, remember that stupidity is not a right. Fight the flat earth.